What does he have to do with this?
Let anything. You know what I'm talking about. Let anything. No, I don't have to say it right now. Don't worry about it. I don't got to say it up here. Let anything happen. And I'm going to show you and him. Bet.
In shape. 145.
Yeah.
In shape. You know what I mean? So this is different from a Crawford coming up to 168, but we know his walk around weight is probably 170, 180.
The fight that I couldn't believe, that was too insane and honestly just baffling to think would be a real fight in 2025, reminds you that combat sports are the craziest sports on the planet.
What began as a routine promotional event for the Gervonta "Tank" Davis vs. Jake Paul fight unraveled into a storm of confrontation and emotion. The press room, buzzing with anticipation and flashing lights, shifted from excitement to volatility in an instant. It started innocently enough. A journalist asked the question that's shadowed Davis all week: why Jake Paul? Why not a ranked contender, a true threat within his division? At first, Tank's demeanor was composed, his responses calm and measured. But when the question resurfaced, phrased more pointedly, his patience snapped. His tone hardened, his words carried edge. What was meant as a defense of his legacy became a declaration, a reminder that his resume was built on years of earned battles, not internet narratives. Jake Paul, sensing opportunity, leaned into the chaos. With calculated provocation, he turned the focus away from boxing and toward personality, mocking Tank's past controversies, questioning his discipline, and striking at his pride. The exchange, once professional, devolved into a battle of egos and emotion. Security tightened their stance. The murmurs in the room fell silent. Every lens zoomed in as the two locked eyes, unblinking, defiant. The tension wasn't theatrical anymore, it was real, raw, and combustible. Within moments, moderators cut the microphones, stepping in before the confrontation spilled beyond words. But the moment had already made its mark. The cameras captured everything: the glare, the posture, the barely contained fury. By the time the press conference ended, one truth was undeniable: the fight was no longer just scheduled, it had already begun.
And truly, when people run back this press conference, all the shit talk, all the fun, they're going to be like, wow, this kid really is doing something monumental in the sport, and he's actually an insane boxer. And I'm going to show that this guy who's been doing it his whole life has been doing it wrong his whole life.
What'd you say, Tank?
He said he's going to outbox me. Whoop-de-doo.
The one thing, when you have a fight of this magnitude, especially with Jake, because his appeal has been global, for you, Tank, do you think this is one of those fights where now all of a sudden you can show your boxing skills on a global scale to maybe people who weren't interested in boxing? All of a sudden they say, well, who is this guy?
Yeah, it's actually like, now that I'm looking at it now, it's just like...
From the moment they stood face to face, it was obvious, this wasn't going to be a polite encounter. Jake Paul, at 6'1", towered over Gervonta "Tank" Davis by nearly half a foot. That single image captured the storyline that's dominated the build-up: brute size versus elite skill. Paul wasted no time turning that visual into psychological warfare. Confident and performative, he flaunted his reach, his frame, and his supposed ability to control the fight from distance. For him, height wasn't just an advantage, it was a weapon, a headline, a narrative he could sell. Davis, calm but cold, met the talk with quiet authority. He reminded everyone that size doesn't decide fights, precision does. Speed, timing, and power in motion are what end nights early. And he's made a career out of exposing taller men who thought they could keep him away. Still, the size gap became the heartbeat of pre-fight debate. Analysts, critics, and former champions weighed in, questioning the very integrity of the matchup. Was this competition, or theater? Many labeled it a mismatch, some even a circus bout wrapped in professional gloss. Because on paper, it's hard to ignore the contrast: Davis, an undefeated, world-class lightweight champion, forged through years of real opposition. Paul, a crossover attraction, fighting above his natural class, built on self-promotion and spectacle. And then came the detail that divided fans even further: the fight is an exhibition, not a sanctioned contest. That single clause blurred the lines between legitimacy and entertainment, between boxing as sport and boxing as show. But regardless of classification, the intrigue is undeniable. The size, the power, the pride, it all feeds a story that's too big to ignore. What began as a novelty matchup has evolved into something larger, a cultural moment testing not just two fighters, but the very boundaries of boxing tradition itself. Former world champion Keith Thurman captured an irony that cuts deep within modern boxing culture. The people trying hardest to diminish Gervonta "Tank" Davis are often the ones keeping his name alive. Thurman's point is simple: criticism fuels attention. The louder the opposition, the brighter the spotlight. The same voices calling Davis overrated are also the first to stream his fights, dissect his rounds, and flood timelines with opinions the moment the final bell rings. That constant conversation, love him or hate him, feeds a cycle of relevance few fighters ever achieve. In the social media era, outrage and admiration travel on the same current, and both lead to visibility. Thurman sees it clearly: every headline, every debate, every heated comment keeps Davis in the public eye. And in boxing, relevance is currency. So while critics think they're breaking him down, they're really building his legend. Gervonta Davis doesn't just thrive on performance, he thrives on presence. And whether you cheer or boo, you're part of the reason he can't be ignored.
The fight. But yeah, that was that. This time, Jake Paul is to take on Tank Davis. Tank Davis, he was recently in the news for being arrested for a domestic violence incident involving one of his kids' mother. He was alleged to have slapped her about the place. The charges were later dropped, to be fair to him. But yeah, that was when he was last in the news. What is interesting is just a couple of months ago, Tank Davis was saying openly that he'd lost his passion for boxing and that he wanted time away from the sport. There was speculation that he might even retire as he was experiencing extreme mental fatigue from boxing, depression, and there were mental health concerns over him. However, I guess the opportunity to earn a truck full of money fighting a completely worthless exhibition fight against Jake Paul was enough to make him change his mind about boxing. Funny that, isn't it? But you know what? I'm not even going to waste your time or mine critiquing this utter nonsense. Suffice to say that this so-called fight we're talking about is an exhibition, and it pits Jake Paul, who is a cruiserweight, by the way, weighs in excess of 200 pounds. And Tank Davis, who is, he was the WBA lightweight champion, who weighs in at about 135 pounds when he fights. So that's a disparity of some 65 pounds. In old money, that's about 4.5 stone. There's also a significant difference in height. Jake Paul is roughly, 6'1", 2. Gervonta Davis is 5'5" at best. So, there's a height disparity there of some 8 inches. And once again, this is Jake Paul showing total disrespect to boxing, in my opinion. Once again, continued to pimp out the sport for his own financial ends. And worse still, the powers that be in boxing allowing him to get away with it and facilitating this utter bullshit. And meanwhile, what's even worse about this is that meanwhile, the WBA lightweight title that Tank Davis should be defending against Lamont Roach in a rematch.
Stephen A. Smith has never been one to soften his stance, and when it comes to the rise of crossover boxing, he didn't hold back. Labeling the recent wave of exhibition spectacles, including Jake Paul's proposed fight with Mike Tyson, as sad and disgusting, Smith drew a hard line between competition and carnival. To him, boxing's integrity is too sacred to be treated like a sideshow. His message to Jake Paul was clear: if you want respect in this sport, you have to earn it the hard way. He challenged Paul to stop chasing nostalgia and start chasing legitimacy, to face active, prime fighters rather than retired icons. Only then, Smith argued, could Paul's name hold real weight among the purists. Yet, amid the criticism, Smith also offered recognition. He praised Paul's unmatched promotional instincts, his ability to pull millions into a fight, to make the world care, even when the boxing elite refused to. In Smith's eyes, that charisma is both a gift and a curse. It draws attention, but it also demands accountability. When Gervonta "Tank" Davis found himself at the center of controversy after a disputed draw against Lamont Roach, Smith once again stood firm, this time in defense of the champion. He dismissed the backlash as short-sighted, reminding audiences that Davis's composure, adaptability, and willingness to run it back spoke louder than any scorecard ever could. For Stephen A., the standard remains unchanged. Hype might fill seats, but heart defines legacies. The spotlight can make you famous, but only discipline, courage, and authenticity make you great.
That Jake will kind of bounce in between doing these entertainment fights and then, trying to push toward his goal of ingraining himself in the sport of boxing, and kind of does both of them. So it's kind of a weird place to be, because he wants the respect of the boxing fans and the boxing hierarchy and hardcore boxing people, but at the same time, he'll gain some of that and then lose some of it. It's like a seesaw of his fights. Like one fight, like, okay, that's a real fight, or that's a real fighter. And he'll go and he'll win the fight. Julio Cesar Chavez, real fighter, maybe past his prime, whatever, but Jake goes and wins that fight pretty easily, and then gets a lot of respect, gets a lot of the boxing hardcore love. And you have these talks about him fighting Anthony Joshua, and that was going to get even more respect. More people were like, that's fucking crazy. What are you doing? Myself included. That seemed like a massive risk, but a lot of people were like, okay, fair play. Anthony Joshua, that's a real heavyweight. Jake wants to fight him. He's a psycho, but fair play. And then you announce this one, and it's like, well, that's the same thing people have been saying about Jake for years, so it's a weird spot to be in for him for sure. But I talked about this not being the first choice, and I don't think it was, because Coppinger reports next that talks for Jake Paul to face Anthony Joshua collapsed over network issues. Now, we had all heard the talks, and they were pretty